Welcome back to another amazing episode 52 authors, 52 weeks. I am joined today by author Loren Sanders, who wrote a book called Empathy is Not a Weakness. Hi, Loren.
Hi, Lisa.
How are you?
I am very glad to be here today talking about this topic.
And I am excited that you are here to talk about this topic because this is an area that I will tell you that depending on the situation, my level of empathy varies. I'll be the first to admit that. Especially if it's a situation that I've gone through before. I'm like, yeah, you can do this. Not realizing that, everyone is not me, right? We're all individuals. And so we have to deal with the things the way that works best for us. So, why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about your background and why you decided to write this particular topic?
This particular topic and my background kind of go hand in hand. I've always managed to end up in a leadership role in any job that I've ever had. And I've worked on the business side and on the HR side. And I often joke that I understand why business side doesn't necessarily love HR and why HR gets so frustrated with the business. But on my journey, I've done a lot of public speaking at different conferences, and I usually talk a lot about leadership. And I kept coming across these spaces where people were telling me that they were exhausted, they were burnt out, they had toxic leaders, they weren't able to get their best work done, they didn't feel safe, they didn't feel courageous, and all of that kind of broke my heart. I used to have these deep conversations with another author who you should actually meet. Her name is Latanya Wilkins, and she wrote the book called Leading Below the Surface. But before we both wrote our books, we used to go to coffee every once in a while and talk about these books that we were going to write. And I always said I was going to write a book called Empathy is Not a Weakness and Other Stories from the Edge, so that I could tell my own story of how I gained better empathy, but also so I could tell other people's stories. And it's really stories of people who were terrible leaders and got better, or people who were treated terribly by leaders and were able to overcome that. And I keep seeing in the news and hearing everywhere the importance of empathy, but what we don't do is tell anybody how to get it. So people either think they have empathy or they think they have no empathy and that there's no hope. And the reality is empathy is a practice, it's not a skill. And until we view it as a practice, then if you're not practicing it, you're getting worse. So my book is really a 7-week, if you do it week by week, reflection on who you are and the different components that will help you become a more empathetic human being. A lot of my readers have told me they read it first for content and then they read it to work the steps. And what's been kind of cool for me is I wrote it with the idea that I was wanting to rid the world of toxic leaders and that there didn't need to be such a thing as toxic leaders ever. But the people who have read it and have been impacted by it have not just been in the leadership space, but have been in the frontline worker space. And it's resonated with them, I think, because of the stories that they're so familiar with. And a lot of people told me that it's given them hope for a future and also an ability to understand how to really set boundaries that matter to them. And that for me has been one of the best things about this journey.
So, when I read it, the first thing that I thought was that you are the voice for the people, the ones that lost their voice because they were caught up in these toxic workplace situations, but also the voice of reason for the leader who is the one that is creating, cultivating, participating, leading this toxic workplace. And I think coming out of the pandemic with the whole, do you work from home? Do you not work from home situation? It has really caused this environment where some people just have checked out or they don't show up at all. I remember just literally going to pick up some food and I called on the phone and they were like, please hold, right? And so then I was like, okay. So they came back on the phone, took my order. So then I got there and I saw the same person who I knew was on the phone because I go to this place quite frequently. And I'm like, you need some help answering this phone. He was like, I cannot get people to come to work. And I'm just wondering, what are these folks doing if they're not working? How are they eating? Because I know in my household, if we don't work, we don't eat. So I feel like this book definitely is one that really could be used in the workplace to lead some employee engagement efforts to really help leaders understand the role that they're playing. So it's awesome. And as a person who is I call myself the leader's leader, right? I'm helping leaders grow their teams, but I'm coaching them to become a better version of themselves. And really, as you said in chapter 2, help them examine those blind spots. Because just like in a car, you don't see them and you don't see them coming. You don't see that person in your mirror coming, and you're blindsided.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you bring up the pandemic as part of this because the pandemic brought up, well, we all need to be more empathetic. So let's go ahead and do that. It doesn't just happen organically. And that's why we're seeing such a shift in how people were before and how we're reverting back to what's comfortable. And really, the pandemic made me recognize that it was time to write the book. The pandemic had a positive influence on empathy everywhere except for first line responders. So think of this, all of a sudden, these people in work environments cared about each other a little bit more, and now they're in crisis mode, and people are on their best behavior, and people at work realize that they could get more done working together and checking in. And sadly, that is not a natural state for most executives to be in, because empathy is a demonstration of caring and respect for colleagues and for customers. And when they're cared for and they're respected, they actually perform better. But now we have all these people who are working hard to balance all of the demands that they have were upended very quickly, and flexibility became the norm. And now we're trying to pull that flexibility back. And the reality is, if we're going to have great work-life integration, then empathy needs to be a part of that, because any research you see shows that it boosts productivity, it boosts innovation, it reduces burnout, but it can't be espoused, right, without transparency, and it can't be espoused without action, because you know what? Employees know if you're authentic or not. And there is so much research out in the world right now about safety and well-being, and we're the company that does X and Y. And it was Ernst & Young who came out, and I don't remember the data off the top of my head at the moment, but there's a huge percentage of employees that don't believe what you're espousing because you're not practicing it. And unless you're willing to practice it, then you're doing it a disservice.
Absolutely. So I work in healthcare, and specifically, I work as a consultant. And just to give you this parallel example, I recently was at a client site and we were talking about a audit that had been done on their hospital, revenue cycle. And so there was this one finding, and let's just say it was 20%. And the goal is to get the service line to 95%. The 20% number that was presented to the leader that was most closely affected said immediately, I don't believe this number. And this number can't just be attributed to my team. There are other teams that are responsible for this end result. And so in that example, what I want to portray is, as a patient, we oftentimes see that frontline worker registration, probably not making a lot of money. And the audit findings was directly related to the work that they do. And this meeting took place in the room full of other leaders. And that one leader immediately was trying to figure out how to shift that finding to everyone else. And then instead of others being empathetic to the situation, they immediately started to attack and say, it's not mine, instead of allowing me to help them work together to figure out the root cause. So I allowed it to play out. And then I said, hey, let's talk about how collectively we can shore up this finding, right? And improve it for all, because at the end of the day, it impacts all of us in our journey to get from having the patient to actually getting the payment. But what we also found was that the folks that were doing the work, they were treated so poorly by their leader that the mistakes that they were making is because they were, and I hate to say this, they were registering patients in the emergency room under duress, and not from the patients, but from their leadership. And so it was this ripple effect, right? That went from this one department to all the other departments that were sitting in the room. And so after they did that, I paused for a moment to play back for them what I just saw as an outsider who wasn't emotionally tied to the process, to the system. And as I started to play this back for them, they started to be more empathetic to the leader whose name department was on this finding, but then started to think about, this is how we can support your department, right? Support your staff. And I think that if I wouldn't have been there, to be the voice of reason for them, this battle would have continued. But the goal is for patients, when they come to the desk to register, they're sick. They want to have a person who's welcoming, who's not stressed out, right, to register them and exercise care for them. And my message to the leaders was, if you want your workforce to exercise care for the patient, you have to exercise care for them. So that was a long story, but as a patient, I'm sure you've experienced that frontline worker who was just like, welcome to Memorial General Hospital. And you're just like, I don't feel well. And this person is not treating me, with kindness, respect, empathy. They're just a body there.
It's funny, sometimes when we're in that front line, we forget that it's more than just a job, especially in healthcare. The job that we do touches so many people, and the people who come to us are sick. Sometimes they're sick and they're mad. Sometimes they're sick and they don't know what's going on. But one of the backdrops I have when I talk about my book, when I go to conferences, is it's a logo called Powered by People, Empowered by Empathy, because I think it's a complete circle. People are powered better when they're treated with empathy, when they're cared for, and you have to give respect to get respect back. One of the most curious things I've found lately, because I like to look at all the data on a regular basis, is how, when we're talking about what good leadership looks like, we're asking the wrong people. We're asking C-level people. We're asking people already in leadership roles. Why are we not asking the front line what good leadership looks like? Engagement scores, don't even get me started with engagement surveys. Not one of your employees believes that anything is anonymous. No one is going to tell you the truth. There have to be better conversations, better discussions, and we have to be more willing to hear somebody else's story and agree with it. I was just on LinkedIn this morning, and you know how those little things pop up that we want you to contribute to this article, and usually they're things that just frustrate you, and you're like, why was I picked for this topic? But this morning one came across to me that was asking about what kind of tools and systems do you need in order to do leadership development? And I said, I'm going to answer this because it doesn't matter what tool you have if you don't have people practicing the skills that are necessary to drive it forward. None of it matters if we're not willing to do what it takes to really make the changes, both systemically and process wise. And one of the best ways that we can really get better at organizations is by listening to the people who work for us, even if we don't necessarily agree with their stories. Their stories are theirs. They're not yours, but we're really good at, and I don't know if a lot of your listeners know about fundamental attribution error, which is a bias that is really common. And if you think hard about it, you'll recognize it in yourself. I don't care who you are, but let's pretend that you're having a meeting and someone is running late for your meeting and they show up late, kind of flustered. You probably feel some kind of way about that, right? They don't care, they're lazy, whatever. But on the flip side of that, someone else is having a meeting, you're running late, your excuses are all fine for you. So why is it that we assume some sort of negative intent when we don't know the whole story? We haven't even attempted to listen to it or care about it. We just rush into that judgment space and have an opinion, tell ourselves stories, and believe our own narrative when it could be completely far from the truth.
You know what? Oh my gosh. So I was recently on a meeting and someone was late, and immediately they were apologizing for being late. And I happened to be, it was a meeting where I was co-leading. So I happened to be speaking at the time. And I told her, it's okay that you're late. You're here now because you're right. You don't know, right? Maybe that person just got some bad news. Maybe that person was in another meeting dealing with a very stressful situation. I read this book that focuses on being a learner versus a judger. And that's where in your book you talk about honest communication and listening. I'm finding myself in situations where I'm having to tell others, and I don't know if this is mean or not, but I say to them, listen to understand as opposed to listen to respond. It's almost like they're listening just to be able to respond as opposed to listen to receive the information, decode the information, and then respond. And I don't know if that's, I got to get the last word. I must say something or I don't look intelligent. If I don't, I don't know what that behavior stems from. But when you listen, first of all, when you listen, you allow your body to relax, take in the information, perhaps learn something like you taught me a word that I didn't know, a concept. So I'm going to be researching that, right? But had I not not been listening, I wouldn't have caught that point. So tell us about, this is one of my favorite topics. Chapter 3 is about managing mindfulness. Why is that so important?
After you just talked a lot about listening, and I know that you're a coach and I'm also a coach, one of the first tenets in coaching practices is really being able to listen. In order to listen well, we need to have that ability to be in the moment with people and listening to what they're saying and understanding what comes along with that. Something that we forget often is, we see how people act, but we don't know the history behind why somebody might be acting the way that they act. Maybe they have to be the loudest person in the room. Well, maybe that's something that comes from having a certain family culture that where everyone is trying to talk over each other, and that's just how they learned to be. That's how they learned to get along in the world. Or maybe we have somebody who was told to be seen and not heard as a child, and that might be the person in the room that is silent. There's so much of your personal history that builds into who you are and travels with you into the workplace. And I really think if you take all the baggage that you collect along a lifetime and you continue to add to it job to job to job, you're just going to have a room full of luggage at some point, rather than taking the time to investigate, why am I feeling like this right now? Why am I feeling judgmental every time I see this person? Or what about this situation is making me fear walking into a room? Or I don't want to go to work on Monday because there's something that I just don't like, or I don't want to do, or this person treats me poorly. There's so much control that you have. If you are practicing mindfulness, you'll start to recognize that you're able to choose your thoughts and the way that you're going to think about things. You're thinking, I think the whole world kind of falls into the concept of cognitive behavioral therapy. And the way that that works is what you're thinking impacts what you do, and what you do impacts your results, right? What's driving our thinking is often driven by what we know and what we've been exposed to. And I'm somebody who moved from Illinois to Iowa about 3 years ago, and moved,
Chicago in the house.
yes. So moving from a very, very blue to a very, very red state has really opened my eyes in a lot of ways when it comes to not understanding other people's stories. I come across people and they say something and I say, someone might find that offensive. And they're like, what do you mean offensive? I've been saying this my whole life. Like, they may not even have any idea that what they're saying is hurtful to you or has triggered you. And so on both sides of this, we both need to have a little bit more grace. If I say something and it upsets you, you have to be willing to be in the moment with me to say, hey, this is really upsetting to me. And I, on the other side, have to be curious about why it's upsetting to you. And even if I don't think it should be upsetting to you, I should accept that it's upsetting to you and not do whatever the thing is. I was just talking on another podcast. We finished the podcast and we started talking about an experience that I had with a politician locally, and she ended up re-recording it. So I'll tell you this story because it might resonate with your listeners. I recently met a politician who was running for office in my state, and I went to a Q&A session, and I noticed during the course of the session that he did not ever address the women. If a woman asked a question, he would respond to the significant other that was there that was male. He wasn't engaging with the women at all, really. He would answer the questions, but not to them. But afterwards, I went up, and because I have a loud mouth, right, to do that stuff, I like to be the voice of, hey, have you thought about it this way? I said, I noticed that you weren't engaging the women, that you were not considering what they were saying unless you were doing it within the context of responding to the male that was in their presence. And I learned, this guy's pretty old, so I won't say how old, but he's an older guy. And after talking to him, one, he didn't recognize he was doing it. And two, he thought it was more respectful to not address the female in the room because he thought it was more respectful to address the spouse. And not going to say right or wrong. I think there's a lot of things wrong with that, honestly. But the reality is how he was brought up in his history and his background, he had no idea that that was even happening. And until somebody pointed it out to him, would have never known and just kept doing that. And I've seen him many times since then. And he's definitely conducted himself a lot differently. And I like to think that maybe I was a part of making that happen, but I didn't know his story. I could have walked away from there and said, this person is horrible. I never want to see them again. I don't want to engage with them. And I definitely don't want them to represent me in any way. But if we just do that, we miss so many opportunities to connect with people. And being mindful and in the moment is giving them the space and time to be who they are, to listen and not get distracted by things, and also to accept what they're telling you as their own story, their own history.
Something just popped into my head, and I don't know if this is biblical, but I remember growing up hearing this statement: first seek to understand. So, in that moment, you presenting your perspective to him and then understanding it, I bet you set him, put him at ease in terms of you making the statements to him. But I'm so happy that you were able to help him grow. But also, by you just sharing this story, you are helping others grow and understand it's okay to have a conversation with someone about something that you feel uncomfortable with. When you made the statement about be seen and not heard, that was something that was in, I'm going to say, my grandparents' household growing up. And I think that as later as a parent, we allowed our kids to have a voice. And so I guess that's why the millennials are so vocal today, because we allowed them to have a voice. We allowed them to participate in the conversation. And I think a lot of cultures and norms from decades ago are still present, and they're holding us back from growing because our mindset hasn't had an opportunity to shift. It's fixed in that particular area. And until we take the time to learn and grow, we think that that's the way, when it might not be the way.
I think it's really important. I believe in mentoring a lot. I believe in coaching. I believe everyone should have a coach. Coaching should be accessible. That's how I run my coaching practice. I'm not turning someone away because they're not have an executive title or something. I believe that, and I will work with people to make sure they can get coaching accessible to them because it helps you grow no matter who you are. As we think about that, I think it's very important for mentoring to happen as well. And when I talk about mentoring, I'm not just talking top down. I think every Gen X, baby boomer, or traditional leader needs a reverse mentor that is
Yes.
at 1 to 3 generations different than they are, because they will help each other understand perspective so much better. Every time I'm working with somebody and they say, oh God, keep the millennials away from me, or I don't want those Gen Z people on my team, I'm like, give them all to me, because you know what? I can execute, but I don't have half the innovation that these, I'll call them kids, even though I know the millennials aren't really kids anymore. I'm a Gen X, so I'll be honest about that. But I really truly believe that there is so much wisdom in those younger generations and so much ability to innovate and to think fast. And maybe they're a little more sensitive because they have seen a lot of what has happened to the other generations and they're not real happy about it. And I think that's okay. We need to be okay with people right where they are, starting right where they are, and we need to listen better all the time.
Oh my gosh. I just want you to know, when you said reverse mentoring, I just wanted to jump out of my seat, because I have been saying that to others and they're like, what do you mean? In healthcare, we have 4 generations of professionals working, right? Boomers and me at 50, trying to be still 25. We have these different generations that we're working with. And there is so much knowledge in that generational span that we can all help support each other. But there are some on one end of the spectrum or the other that doesn't believe that we should mix together, when we absolutely need to mix together. I love hanging out with the younger folks because, first of all, I love technology. I learned how to type on a typewriter and then immediately went to the computer, right? So I'm one of those early adopters of artificial intelligence and all those things. But I love when a young person says, if you do such and such, this will happen. And I'm like, oh, cool. That is cool. I'm going to do that. Whereas others are like, you're still wet behind the ears. You can't tell me what to do. Whereas I am absorbing and learning from them.
So much knowledge, so much information, so many gifts to share with us if we're open as an older generation to what they can bring. And some of the best relationships I have, some of my best friendships are with people that are my kids' age, because we can have they're so much better at open dialogue than we were taught to be. I can't say enough good things about the up and coming generations. They're going to save the world.
Oh, they absolutely are. They absolutely are. Well, listen, before we run out of time, please tell our listening audience 2 things. One, where they can get their own copy of the book, Empathy is Not a Weakness, but also tell them about how they can find you from a coaching perspective, because I believe that there are some people who I don't need to coach, right? There are some folks maybe that you don't need to coach, right? So this world is open to us all. And I want our listening, viewing audience to know where to find you.
Awesome. They can find my book, Empathy is Not a Weakness, and other stories from the edge wherever they buy books. So Amazon, Barnes and Noble, bookshop.org, just about anywhere you want to. My book website is Loren365. You'll find out a little bit more about that if you go to my website. Also, So the pages that are used for the reflections, you can download those right from my site for free. It's pretty basic Word doc, but it'll help you if you don't want to write in the book, as a lot of people don't. I've been coaching under my Loren 365 for a while. I'm actually opening a separate arm of fractional consulting and coaching that's called Rockslow, and it'll be rockslowcoaching.com. And that website is coming out probably early next week. So 2 different ways, or reach out to me on LinkedIn. Definitely a presence there. So follow me. I put out a newsletter every Wednesday. Oops, it's called Emotional Adventures in the Office.
Now you're going to make me be more accountable for my LinkedIn articles. I was just telling my virtual assistant that I got to do better with those articles. It's just a struggle trying to balance. And I find myself in my healthcare consulting role having to coach others. And then when I'm not being paid to do that, and I'm like, oh, I can write this article. So I have this long list on my phone of articles that I need to write. So you've just reignited that fire under me to write more articles on LinkedIn.
What I would tell you is I don't put my business newsletter out as you have to subscribe to it. I just post it on my page, and I basically say here, and I've only got 2 episodes out so far, and it's every Wednesday, and it is download it if you want to, read it if you want to. You don't need to subscribe to anything because we all have enough email. So.
Absolutely. You know what? When I post my articles, I just post it because I do agree. Even on my own page that I subscribe to, I think right now I have about 25 like this newsletter requests. And then when you do it, your email is flooded with all these emails, and I have enough emails to read on a daily basis.
Right. All of us do.
Yes. Well, Loren, thank you so much for joining me on another episode of 52 Authors, 52 Weeks. I know that our listening, viewing audience is going to be blessed by the information that you shared today. I know that I have a couple of to-dos for myself. My husband said to me recently, are you buying all of those books for the 52 authors? And I'm like, yeah, how else am I supposed to read them, right? But I'm learning and growing from each and every episode, and it's really an honor for me to meet you. And I want to thank you again for coming on today.
Thank you. It's been an honor for me to be here, and I'm so glad I met you. Let's keep this conversation going
Yeah,
beyond this.
absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.